Imagine the kindest, most respected woman in the entire galaxy, standing in front of trillions, speaking about 900 years of peace. Now imagine the oldest, most powerful empire in that same galaxy, shooting her on live television for the whole universe to see. That's exactly what happened. And if you think you know how this story ends, stick around, because they made one critical mistake and it was about to unravel everything. The day started on Concordia Prime, a stunning space station that had been a symbol of peace for almost a millennium. General Amara Chen, Earth's 63-year-old peacekeeper, was looking out her window at the sea of stars. She was a legend, straight-backed and strong, with kind lines around her dark eyes and silver hair at her temples. Those eyes had witnessed 17 different conflicts, and not with a bang, but with her calm, patient words. She was the reason the galaxy was celebrating the 900th anniversary of the Great Peace. She wasn't just Earth's representative. To many, she was the living heart of peace itself. A gentle knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Mom," a familiar voice said, "it's time." Amara smiled, her face softening as she opened the door to her son, Admiral James Chen. He stood there, sharp and serious in his uniform, a mirror of the father he'd lost long ago. "You look a little tense," Amara teased, noticing he had her worried eyes. "You're about to give a speech to 10,000 worlds, Mom," James replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "Someone has to be nervous." She laughed, a quiet, warm sound. "I've done this before." "Not like this," he insisted. 900 years, the entire galaxy is tuned in." She reached up and touched his cheek. "Then let's give them a show to remember." As they made their way through the station's grand halls, delegates from 1,000 species parted before them, offering nods of deep respect. The corridors were a vibrant, chaotic parade of life, beings with 2 legs, 6 legs, or no legs at all, some in environmental suits, others breathing the station's air. It was a beautiful testament to what Amara had worked her entire life to protect. The main assembly hall was breathtaking, a colossal space holding 50,000 beings, with every single seat taken. Countless floating cameras were broadcasting the event, sending their images across light years to trillions more. Front and center sat the Big Five, the four-armed scaly Cray, the hive-minded Vorn Collective, the elegant silver-skinned Saluran Federation, the massive mountain-like Morak Dominion. And sitting right in the middle, radiating arrogance, were the Zarathayans. They were the oldest and most powerful empire, the self-proclaimed natural rulers of the galaxy. Their leader, High Archon Velketh, was draped in purple and gold. His species looked almost human, just taller, with pale blue skin and eyes as cold and empty as deep space. The Zarathayans had been conquering star systems back when humans were still figuring out the pointy end of a stick. Amara stepped onto the platform, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders, and began to speak. "Friends," she started, her voice echoing with warmth and sincerity, "we gather today to celebrate something incredibly precious. We celebrate peace." She reminded them of the Dark Ages, of the terrible wars that had scarred every species. She honored the wisdom of their ancestors who chose to build bridges instead of walls. "For 900 years," she said, her voice ringing with passion, "we have proven that we are stronger together." But High Archon Velketh wasn't listening. He was remembering when humans were just noisy primates on a backwater planet. He saw them not as partners, but as a weed growing too fast, spreading too far. In just 9 short centuries, humanity had gone from newcomers to galactic leaders. They were everywhere. In science, in diplomacy, in culture, their influence was exploding. Velketh had seen the writing on the wall. He had warned his council that if left unchecked, humanity would eclipse them all. The old powers would be forgotten. So, a plan was made. A cruel, simple plan to remind the upstarts of their proper place. As Amara spoke of a shared future, Velketh gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. One of his guards, with a weapon hidden in the folds of his robe, fired. There was no sound, just a silent, searing beam of energy. The beam hit General Chen squarely in the chest. For one frozen second, the universe held its breath. Amara looked down, a look of utter shock on her face as red blossomed across her white uniform. Her eyes found her son, who was already running towards her, and then the cameras, broadcasting to trillions. "Remember," she managed to whisper, her voice fading. "Remember what we are." And then she collapsed. Chaos erupted. Screams echoed through the massive hall as security forces swarmed the Zarathaean delegation, who were already forming a defensive circle around their Archon. James reached his mother, his hands trying desperately to stop the bleeding. He could see the life draining from her face, and he knew with a sickening certainty that he was losing her. "Hang on," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, just hang on." Amid the pandemonium, High Archon Velketh stood perfectly calm. He had expected outrage, maybe a pathetic human charge. He saw only shock and sorrow. "This woman was a threat to galactic security," Velketh's voice boomed, cutting through the noise. "The Zarathian Empire has acted to protect you all from her terrorist connections." It was a lie so blatant, so insulting. It was almost brilliant. Before anyone could react, the entire Zarathaean delegation vanished in flashes of light, teleporting back to their waiting warships. Within minutes, their fleet tore a hole in space and was gone. Admiral James Chen was left kneeling in his mother's blood. Medical teams finally reached them and rushed Amara to emergency surgery, leaving James with nothing but a cold, hollow feeling that was rapidly turning to ice. The other delegates were in an uproar. Some screamed for war, others begged for calm. But James didn't hear any of it. He walked like a ghost through the chaos, his mind a silent storm. He found himself on the bridge of his flagship, the UEES Vengeance. In the quiet dark of his private quarters, he thought about his mother's entire life's work. A 900-year peace shattered in a single cowardly moment. He thought about the arrogance of the Zarathians. Then he opened a secure channel to the entire human military fleet. His face, cold and hard as stone, appeared on every screen. "This is Admiral Chen," he said, his voice dangerously level. "You've all seen what happened. General Amara Chen, my mother, was attacked by Zarathaean forces during the peace summit." He let that sink in. 900 years ago, we made a promise to the galaxy. We promised to be peacemakers, and for 900 years we have kept that promise. His eyes, once so thoughtful, now held a terrifying darkness. "Signal all fleets." "Condition Omega," he ordered. "The old ones have forgotten why that treaty was signed in the first place. It's time we reminded them." The channel went dead. All across human-controlled space, on hundreds of worlds and thousands of ships, ancient, dormant alarms began to scream. A war machine, asleep for centuries, had just been kicked awake. The Zarathaeans thought they had cut the head off the snake. They thought humanity would fall apart, that they would beg for forgiveness. They had no idea they hadn't just shot a peacekeeper. They had just unleashed the very monster she had spent her life trying to keep chained. The news hit the galaxy like a shockwave. Everyone saw the clip over and over. Amara's final words, "Remember what we are," became a haunting question. And as the human fleets began to move with a speed and coordination that stunned the galaxy, everyone was about to get the answer. The peace was over, and the galaxy was about to learn a terrible history lesson. He spun a tale for them, claiming humanity's ambition had grown unchecked, a weed in the galactic garden. He insisted the humans were about to shatter the treaty anyway, and that his Zarathaean empire had only struck first in self-defense. He promised the other galactic powers would either back their play or look the other way. Because after all, humans were just the new kids on the block, weak and inexperienced. They've gotten soft, living in peace for so long, Velkat declared. They've forgotten the art of war. The moment they see our might, they'll fold. It's what they always do. His advisors all nodded like puppets on a string. The Zarathian Empire boasted 50 times more warships than the whole of humanity. Their technology was legendary, their soldiers the conquerors of 100 worlds before humans even knew how to make fire. But that bravado wasn't shared by everyone. Far away, on the Cathali homeworld, Ambassador Varmoth was in his private study, surrounded by stacks of ancient books and data slates. His 4 hands were shaking as he unsealed documents that hadn't seen the light of day for 900 years. Documents that painted a picture so different from the official story it was terrifying. The official history books claimed the Pax Galactica was a generous gift, a helping hand from the elder races to the younger ones, letting species like humans join the cosmic community without bloodshed. The official story said humans were thankful, humble, and desperate to learn. The official story was a complete and total lie. Varmoth knew. He'd been a junior diplomat when that treaty was signed. As he read the old reports, the memories flooded back. 9 centuries ago, humanity wasn't the only intelligent life on Earth. The Creali had discovered them first, a primitive race just dipping their toes into their own solar system. The Creali saw them as easy targets, a simple species to conquer and use for labor. They couldn't have been more wrong. The Creali invasion of Earth was over in 3 days. By the time the dust settled, half of their mighty fleet was cosmic junk. The humans fought with weapons nobody saw coming: atomic bombs, chemical agents, engineered plagues. They turned their own world into a death trap. Their sheer ferocity sent shockwaves through the galaxy. But that was just the start. The Cathali screamed for backup. 11 other species joined the war against this one, single human world. The Vaughn Collective, the Salarans, the Morak, even the Zarathians themselves. It was 12 advanced civilizations against one backwater planet. It should have been a slaughter. It was just not the way they expected. The humans were terrifyingly fast learners. Every weapon fired at them was analyzed, copied, and made better. Every strategy was dissected and countered. They captured alien ships and reverse-engineered them in weeks. They took advanced technology and made it their own. Within 5 years, humanity wasn't just defending Earth anymore. They were on the attack. Their ships started popping up in star systems light years from home, hitting supply depots and military outposts. They started liberating other species that the 12 powers had enslaved. The war dragged on for 20 years. By the end, the great powers weren't trying to conquer humanity. They were fighting for their own survival. Varmoth remembered the last stand. The human fleet had materialized over the Creali homeworld, their ships so numerous they blotted out the stars. They had the power to turn the entire planet into a cinder, but they held back. A human general broadcast a message to every being on the planet. "We never asked for this war. You forced it on us. We're offering you a choice, peace or annihilation. You have 1 hour to decide." The Creali chose peace. So did the other 11 species. The Pax Galactica wasn't born from the kindness of elder races. It was born from the mercy of humanity. Varmoth powered down the ancient records and got to his feet. He went straight to his communications console and sent a priority message, not to his own leaders, but straight to the Zarathian Archon. "Hi, Archon Velkiath," he began, his voice thick with the shame of 900 years. "You fools, you absolute galaxy-dooming fools. You just killed the one person holding them back." Similar scenes were happening all over the galaxy as the old memories surfaced. On the Vaughn Central World, millions of bodies froze as the hive mind dug into its deepest archives. Memories of human soldiers who kept fighting even after their bodies were torn apart. Memories of human scientists cracking communication codes that had been unbreakable for thousands of years. But there were also memories of human kindness, of prisoners of war being released, of wounded enemies being treated. The collective remembered the fear, a bone-deep terror of a species that seemed to have no limits. On the Morak homeworld, ancient warriors gathered in their halls to speak of the battles their grandfathers had fought. The Morak were the biggest, strongest species in the known galaxy. They prided themselves on fearing nothing. But the stories their elders told of the humans made even their children tremble. "They just don't stop," the old warriors would say. "You can break their bones, but you can't break their spirit. They fight to win, or they fight until they're all dead. And even then, their children remember, and their children come back for you." The Silurians, who saw themselves as the most civilized and intelligent species, had tried to analyze humans to figure out what made them so formidable. Their findings were chilling. Humans were dangerous because they could be anything they needed to be. They could be gentle and savage, patient and impulsive, logical and emotional. They adapted to everything. They used every tool they could find. And they never, ever gave up. On 1,000 different worlds, beings who had known nothing but peace their entire lives felt a primal fear stirring. Their parents had told them stories. Their grandparents had the scars to prove them. The galaxy had spent 900 years actively trying to forget what humanity was truly capable of. Now, it was all coming back. And then, something eerie happened. Human space went dark. It began at the borders. Communication relays went silent. Cargo ships abruptly turned around. Warships vanished from their patrol routes. Within 2 days, not a single signal was coming out of human territory. No ships went in, and none came out. The Zarathayans thought it was hilarious. "They're running scared," Velkath announced to his council. "They know they can't win, so they're cowering like cornered animals. Any day now they'll send diplomats to beg for mercy." But the older races weren't laughing. The Cthali ambassador shot a private message to his government. "They are not hiding. They are getting ready. I've seen this before. We all have. The humans always go quiet right before they attack. They gather their forces, they finalize their plans, and when they emerge..." He trailed off. He didn't have to finish. On the capital station, Concordia Prime, the other delegations were in a panic, trying to decide what to do. Some argued they should side with the Zarathayans. "The humans are a menace," they said. "Maybe it's better to put them in their place now before they get any stronger." Others argued for staying out of it completely. It was a fight between humans and Zarathayans, so why get involved? But the Cthali ambassador stood up and spoke against both ideas. He stood before the entire assembly, feeling the crushing weight of history on his shoulders. "I was there," he said, his voice quiet but firm. 900 years ago. I was at the signing of the treaty. We didn't sign it out of mercy. We signed it because we were scared out of our minds. We pleaded with the humans to stop. We offered them anything they wanted if they would just end the war." He scanned the faces of the assembled delegates. General Chen wasn't just a diplomat. She was a living symbol. She was the embodiment of everything humanity chose to be instead of what they could have been. She was their solemn promise to us that they would choose peace. His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "And you shot her." He locked eyes with the Siluran delegation. "Your grandparents firebombed human cities from orbit, and the humans forgave you." He turned to the Morak. "Your ancestors enslaved entire human colonies. The humans freed themselves and still offered you a treaty." He then looked toward the empty seats of the Zarathayan delegation. "And now, you have murdered the one woman who spent her entire life convincing her people to be gentle. You have just reminded them of every single crime we ever committed against them. You have woken a monster that should have been left to sleep for eternity." The chamber was dead silent. What will they do?" someone finally asked. Varmuth closed his eyes. They will come, and they will remind us once again why we were so afraid in the first place. Deep inside human territory, in secret shipyards hidden from every telescope in the galaxy, ancient machinery roared to life. Weapons that had been sealed away for centuries were being reactivated. Soldiers were receiving orders that had been passed down for generations. The humans weren't hiding. They were waking up. Deep under the red sands of Mars, in tunnels no alien had ever seen, lights began to glow for the first time in 900 years. Machines that had been dormant since before recorded history began to hum with unimaginable power. Dust shook loose from metal hulls as ancient computer systems ran their diagnostics and reported everything was perfect. Commander Sarah Park strode through these tunnels, her heart pounding with a sense of sacred duty. She'd known this place existed her whole life. Every human soldier did. But knowing and seeing were two very different things. "How long has all this been down here?" her Lieutenant Cole asked in disbelief, walking beside her. "Since before the treaty was even a thought," Sarah said. "Our great-great-grandparents built it. Their great-great-grandparents kept it running. Every generation since has added to it." They stepped into a colossal cavern, bigger than any city on the surface. As far as the eye could see, warships hung in the darkness, ready to launch. These ships looked nothing like the peaceful freighters the galaxy was used to seeing. These were monsters of war. "The Zarathaians think we have 3,000 ships," Sarah said with a grim smile. "They think they have us outnumbered 50-1. She gestured to the endless rows of silent, waiting vessels. "They're really bad at math." It was the same story all across human space. On Earth, vaults sealed by the original treaty signers were cracking open for the very first time. For 900 years, the seals on these vaults had been checked, maintained by a secret order whose only purpose was to be ready for a day everyone prayed would never arrive. Standing inside one, Admiral James Chen looked at weapons that made his own state-of-the-art fleet look like children's toys, devices that could literally rip holes in the fabric of space. He saw shields that learned from every hit they took, and ships that moved faster than the laws of physics were supposed to allow. 900 years, he murmured. For 900 years we hoped we'd never have to open these doors. Beside him, his chief scientist, Dr. Emily Vance, gave a solemn nod. "Your ancestors were smart, Admiral. They understood that peace is a fragile thing. They knew someone someday would forget that lesson. So they prepared. Every single generation prepared," Emily said softly. "Your mother knew about all this. She dedicated her life to making sure we'd never need it." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "But she also made sure it would work if we did." James nodded, his heart a cold, heavy stone. Just an hour ago, he'd gotten the word his mother was alive. The doctors had pulled her back from the brink. She was in a medically induced coma, her body slowly mending, but she was going to make it. And when she woke up, he was determined to tell her that the threat was gone, that her life's work of building peace could continue. All across the planet, the people of Earth began their preparations with a strange, calm efficiency. There was no panic, no rioting in the streets. Every family knew their role. Every child had been taught the drills since they could walk. The Galactic Treaty demanded that humans disarm and forget the ways of war. Humanity had agreed to be peaceful, but they never, ever agreed to be weak. There's a big difference. Old soldiers emerged from quiet retirements, men and women from peacekeeping corps who had trained for a war they never saw. They donned uniforms kept pristine for decades, reporting to duty stations they'd only ever seen in simulations. And the youth joined them, kids who grew up hearing epic stories of the First Contact War, who played video games defending Earth, and who always felt a quiet certainty that this day was not just a possibility, but an inevitability. In classrooms across human space, teachers stopped their lessons. "The peace has been broken," they told their students. "But you remember our way. We only fight when we have no other choice, and we remember that even our enemies are people." The students listened, their faces serious. They got it. They'd always gotten it. This was the burden and the pride of being human, to tirelessly work for peace while always being prepared for war, to be gentle by choice but terrifying by necessity. On the colony world of New Singapore, Governor Marcus Webb stood before his people. "The Xyrathians think they know us," he announced, his voice booming. "They remember the scared, clumsy newcomers we were. They have no idea what we've become." He held up a hand, revealing a long, silvery scar across his palm. "My grandfather gave me this, a reminder of what our people endured, to never let our guard down again." His voice thickened with resolve. "We are not weak. We have never been weak. We just chose peace. Well, that choice has been made for us now, and the entire galaxy is about to find out what happens when you corner something that just wanted to be left alone." High in orbit over Earth, Admiral Chen strode onto the bridge of his flagship, the UES Vengeance. It was a brand new warship, forged in the last decade, the shining crown of humanity's fleet. But it wouldn't be fighting alone. All around it, blinking into existence, came the ghosts. From secret craters on the moon, from hollowed-out asteroids, from forgotten places no one ever thought to look, the old fleet emerged. These were the ships built in the grim years after the First Contact War, secretly maintained and silently upgraded, generation after generation, waiting for the day they would be needed again. The Xyrathians boasted a fleet of 50,000 warships. Their intelligence told them humanity had maybe 3,000 tops. The real number was 30,000. And every single human ship was generations ahead of anything the Xyrathians had ever imagined. James Chen stared at the tactical map in his command center as his officers moved with the quiet focus of masters at their craft. There was no excitement, no thirst for battle. There was only a grim sense of duty. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "the other galactic powers are hailing us. They're demanding to know our intentions." "Let them wait," James said without looking up. "They had their chance to stop this. They did nothing." "Sir, the Crathali ambassador is on a private channel. He says it's urgent." James paused, then gave a slight nod. The ancient, wrinkled face of the Crathali ambassador, Varmov, materialized on the screen. He looked exhausted, sad, and deeply afraid. "Admiral Chen," Varmov began, "you must listen to me." "I'm listening. I was there. 900 years ago. I saw what your people were capable of. I also saw what we did to provoke you." The ambassador's voice trembled with ancient guilt. "I'm sorry. I have been sorry for every single day of my long life. When the treaty was signed, I swore I would dedicate my remaining years to upholding it." James remained silent, his face unreadable. The Xyrathians. They acted alone. Many of us in the council tried to reason with them. We failed. Varmov leaned in, his eyes pleading. "But please, Admiral, I beg you. Remember the lessons your mother taught the galaxy. Revenge is not the same as justice. Don't let the innocent suffer for the crimes of the guilty." For a long, tense moment, James just stared. Then he spoke. "Ambassador, do you know the last thing my mother said to me before she left for that peace summit?" "No." "She said that peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the choice to solve problems without violence. She said we must always, always offer that choice first, even to those who don't deserve it." A flicker of hope ignited in Varmov's eyes. "The Xyrathians will be given their choice," James continued, his voice turning to ice. "We will not target their civilians. We will not firebomb their cities. We will go directly to their leaders, and we will offer them the chance to surrender, to stand trial, and to answer for what they've done." He leaned forward, his eyes like steel. "But if they say no, Ambassador, then we will tear down their empire ourselves, and there is nothing in this galaxy that can stop us." The channel went dead. Admiral Chen turned to his crew. "Signal the fleet. Signal the Sci. We move in 6 hours." "What about the other powers, sir?" his executive officer asked. "Will they try to intervene?" "They remember," James said simply. "They remember what we are. They won't get in the way." And he was right. Across the galaxy, the great powers watched in stunned silence as the human fleet gathered. They saw ships numbering beyond belief, wielding weapons beyond comprehension, using technology that simply shouldn't exist. The analytical Vaughn Collective ran the odds of a war against this human armada. The calculation was instant. The result was 100%. Utter and complete defeat was a mathematical certainty. They would not interfere. The fearsome Morak War Council debated for less than a minute. Their ancestors had passed down one simple rule through the generations: never ever pick a fight with humans. They would not interfere. The Salarans, the Cathali, every species that recalled the horrors of the First Contact War arrived at the exact same conclusion. This was a reckoning between humanity and the Xyrathians, and no one was stupid enough to get in the middle of it. On his flagship, Admiral Chen addressed his senior officers. Behind him, the peaceful stars of home twinkled. 900 years ago, he said, his voice steady and clear, our ancestors taught the galaxy to fear us. Today, we're going to remind them why. He turned towards the view screen, towards the cold void where the enemy waited. All ships, engage hyperspace drives. We're going to war. 30,000 points of light flared and then vanished, leaving nothing but empty space where the most powerful fleet in history had just been. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was furious. High Archon Velketh stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Imperial Majesty, a smug smile playing on his lips. Before him, the awesome might of the Xyrathian Empire was arrayed in perfect disciplined lines. 50,000 warships, the biggest fleet the galaxy had ever seen, ready to defend the glorious empire. "The humans are on their way," his tactical officer announced. "Long-range scans are picking up approximately 30,000 ships." Velketh's smile grew even wider. 30,000? More than they'd expected, but they were still badly outnumbered. And everyone knew Xyrathian ships were better, their crews more experienced, their tactics honed over 10,000 years of conquest. "They're coming here to die," Velketh chuckled. "Let them." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace with terrifying precision, appearing at the very edge of the Xyrathian formation. For a few silent, tense seconds, the two massive armadas just faced each other across the void. Thousands upon thousands of ships, shields shimmering, weapons humming with power. Admiral Chen gazed at the enemy fleet and felt nothing. No fear, no doubt, just a cold, clear resolve to finish what the Xyrathians had so foolishly started. "Open a channel," he ordered. "All frequencies. I want every last one of them to hear this." His officer complied. "Channel is live, sir." "Xyrathian fleet. This is Admiral James Chen of the United Earth Navy. Your leaders have committed an unprovoked act of war by attempting to assassinate General Amara Chen during a peace ceremony. We demand the immediate and unconditional surrender of High Archon Velketh and every officer responsible for this cowardly attack. You have 1 hour to comply. If you do not, we will come through you to get them." When Velketh heard the message, he burst out laughing. A loud, arrogant laugh that echoed across his bridge, and his officers nervously joined in. "The nerve!" Velketh bellowed. "The absolute mind-boggling nerve of these little creatures! They are outnumbered, outclassed, and they have the audacity to demand our surrender?" He activated his own comms. "Human fleet, this is High Archon Velketh. Your pathetic species has forgotten its place. Today, you get a reminder. We will annihilate your fleet, we will burn your worlds, and we will teach your children to bow down to their masters." He cut the channel and spun to face his tactical officer. "All ships, advance and engage. Destroy every last one of them." 50,000 Xyrathian warships surged forward, a tidal wave of destruction. Admiral Chen watched them come, his expression unchanging. His officers were tense, their knuckles white. They had trained for this day their whole lives. But training is one thing. This was real. This was it, the moment of truth. The Admiral's weapons officer leaned in, his voice tense. "Sir, the enemy is finally in range of our main cannons." "Hold your fire," the Admiral said, his voice steady as a rock. "Let them get a little cozier." The Xyrathians, arrogant and sure of their victory, closed the gap. Across the void, on thousands of their bridges, their weapons hummed to life, their targeting systems locking onto the human fleet. Then, their commanders gave the one order they would live to regret: fire. The first volley was a terrifying spectacle. Thousands of energy beams and missiles sliced through the blackness, aimed directly at the heart of the human fleet. It should have been a massacre, wiping out dozens of ships in a single devastating blow. But it wasn't. The entire salvo hit nothing but empty space. The human ships moved in a way the Xyrathians had never conceived of, flowing through the battlefield like water weaving around stones. Their engines were bending the laws of physics in ways that Xyrathian scientists would later swear was pure magic. Not a single shot landed. Before the enemy could even figure out what just happened, the humans returned fire. The first Xyrathian ship to go down was a massive battlecruiser, the Eternal Glory. 1 second it was there, shields flaring and guns blazing. The next, it just wasn't. There was no explosion, no wreckage, not even a scrap of metal. It simply vanished. Then another ship blinked out of existence, and another. On the bridge of the Imperial Majesty, the Xyrathian leader, Velketh, stared at his tactical screen, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. "What is happening?" he demanded. "What kind of weapons are those?" But nobody had an answer. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. The human fleet sliced into the Xyrathian formation like a scalpel through paper. Their ships moved with a flawless, terrifying coordination, each one knowing exactly where it needed to be. Their weapons struck with surgical precision, erasing military ships from existence while carefully leaving supply freighters and medical transports completely unharmed. Xyrathian commanders scrambled to react. They tried new formations, switched up their tactics, and screamed for reinforcements. It was useless. Every move they made, the humans seemed to have predicted it. Every trap they laid, the humans gracefully sidestepped. Every strength they had relied on for centuries, the humans twisted into a fatal weakness. "Fall back!" Velketh finally roared in desperation. "All ships retreat to secondary positions!" But running away wasn't an option. Suddenly, human ships materialized behind the Xyrathian fleet, cutting off any chance of escape. They appeared above and below, boxing in the Great Armada. The predators had just become the prey. The battle raged for 6 hours. When the dust settled, the entire Xyrathian fleet was gone. Not just defeated or scattered, it was annihilated. 50,000 warships were now nothing but drifting junk. And the human losses? A mere 147 ships. All across the galaxy, civilizations watched the battle on their screens in stunned silence. They saw the most powerful military in history get brushed aside like it was nothing. They saw human ships performing feats that should have been utterly impossible. What they witnessed was the terrifying, beautiful efficiency of a species that had been quietly preparing for this exact moment for 900 years. But the Xyrathian Empire wasn't conquered that day. The humans didn't claim their planets or enslave their people. Instead, the human fleet pushed deeper into their territory, striking only military targets. Bases were vaporized. Defense platforms were neutralized. Key government buildings were surrounded, but every civilian neighborhood was left untouched. On the Xyrathian worlds, human soldiers landed. They didn't come to burn and pillage. They set up public information centers and broadcast one simple message in every language. We are not here for your people. We are here for the ones who tried to murder our mother. Do not stand in our way, and you will not be harmed. If you know where the guilty are hiding, help us find them, and this will all be over much faster. The Zarathaians had braced themselves for monsters. Instead, they found soldiers sharing rations with hungry children, medics treating the enemy's wounded, and officers who actually apologized for the inconvenience and promised to be gone soon. This was infinitely more terrifying than any brutal invasion could have been. On the Cathali homeworld, Ambassador Varmoth watched the news feeds with tears streaming down his face. They could destroy everything, he whispered to his aides. They could burn the Zarathaians to ash, and not a soul in the galaxy could stop them. But they aren't. They are choosing not to. But why? One of his aides asked. After what the Zarathaians did? Because that, Varmoth replied, is what makes them human. They aren't cruel. They aren't evil. They are simply without limits. In peace and in war, they choose who they want to be. And today, they have chosen to be merciful. He shook his head in awe. The Zarathaians shot the wrong woman. They shot the living symbol of human mercy. And now, humanity is showing the entire galaxy that this mercy wasn't just because of one person. It is who they are. Back on Earth, in a high-security hospital room, General Amara Chen opened her eyes for the first time since the attack. Her body felt impossibly weak. Her chest ached where the energy blast had torn through her, but she was alive. "James," she whispered, asking for her son. A nurse gently explained everything that had happened: the war, the impossible victory, the human fleet advancing through Zarathaian space. Amara closed her eyes and began to cry, not tears of pride or gratitude, but of deep sorrow. "So much destruction," she murmured. "So much pain. I worked my whole life to prevent this." "Ma'am," the nurse said softly, "your son gave very specific orders. No civilian targets, no unnecessary casualties. They're being incredibly careful." Amara managed a weak nod. That sounds like my James. He always was a good listener." She lay in her bed, her mind racing, thinking about the peace she had fought for, the war that had shattered it, and what on earth could possibly come next. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the crumbling Zarathaian Empire, High Archon Velketh was hiding in his palace. The mighty leader who had ordered General Chen's assassination was now a fugitive. His invincible fleet was a graveyard. His government had dissolved. His own people were hunting him in the streets. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the grand hall. "High Archon Velketh," said James Chen, his voice calm but carrying immense power. "By the authority of the United Earth Government, and in accordance with galactic law, I am placing you under arrest for crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and the attempted murder of a diplomatic official. You will stand trial for what you have done. Justice is coming." Velketh stared at the young human standing before him, strong, poised, with eyes that held a universe of both fury and restraint. The son of the woman he had tried to kill. "You could just kill me," Velketh spat. "No one would stop you. No one would even blame you." "Yes," James agreed, his voice dangerously quiet. "I could. I've thought about it every single day since you shot my mother. I've imagined snapping your neck with my bare hands." He took a step closer. "But that's not who we are. That's not the man she raised me to be. You will face justice, real justice, and the entire galaxy will be watching." Human guards stepped forward and took the trembling Velketh into custody. The war was over, but now the hard part was about to begin. The trial of High Archon Velketh was broadcast to every planet, every moon, every station in the known galaxy. Trillions of beings watched as the once feared ruler stood before an interspecies court. He wasn't wearing his royal robes, just a simple gray jumpsuit. His pale blue skin looked sickly under the courtroom lights. His eyes, once so full of arrogance and power, were now just empty. Admiral James Chen watched from the gallery. He had done his part. He had brought the monster to justice. Now, it was up to others to decide his fate. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings of Velketh planning the attack, testimony from his own top advisors who had turned against him, proof that General Chen had posed zero threat and the entire security scare was a lie. Velketh tried to defend his actions. He rambled about the natural order of the galaxy, about the duty of elder races to keep younger species in their place. He talked about tradition and history and destiny. The court listened patiently, and then they found him guilty on all charges. But his sentence wasn't death. Humanity had specifically asked that the death penalty be taken off the table. Instead, he was sentenced to live out the rest of his very long life on a desolate prison planet, alone with nothing but his memories, forced to watch the galaxy evolve in all the ways he tried so desperately to stop. Some felt the punishment was too light, but others knew that for a man like Velketh, being erased from history was a fate far worse than death. With the trial over, everyone wondered what would happen now. The old Pax Galactica was shattered. The balance of power was gone. Something new had to be built in its place. 3 months after the conviction, a grand assembly was called on Concordia Prime. The station was fully repaired. In the Great Hall, a memorial now marked the exact spot where General Chen had fallen. Representatives from every known species arrived. And not just the old superpowers, but the small, overlooked races too, species that had never been given a voice before. Humanity sent 2 delegates, Admiral James Chen in his crisp military uniform, a symbol of the strength that had saved the galaxy, and beside him, still recovering in a hover chair, was his mother, General Amara Chen. A hush fell over the entire hall as she entered. This was the woman who had been shot, the woman whose near death had launched a war and whose survival had helped forge a new peace. Amara looked older now, the ordeal having taken its toll, but her eyes were just as sharp, just as kind, and just as full of hope as they had ever been. Her son helped her to the speaker's platform. For a long moment, she just looked out at the sea of faces, all these different beings from every corner of the galaxy, all watching her. "I died on this spot," she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "For a few minutes my heart stopped. I was gone." She gently touched the memorial beside her. "When I finally woke up, they told me everything. They told me about the war, the lightning-fast battles, and the terrifying destruction my son had unleashed. Then, after a long pause, they told me about the mercy he had shown. As my mother's eyes swept across the massive assembly, she seemed to look into the soul of every species there. She said, 'My son commanded a fleet that could have turned the entire Zorathian Empire into stardust. And nobody could have stopped him. Honestly, no one would have even blamed him. I was his mom, and they had just tried to put me in the ground. My son, James, just stood behind her, his expression like stone. But," she continued, "he chose a different path. He chose to wage war only on those who started the war. And he chose to shield the countless innocent people who had done nothing wrong. He chose mercy, especially when it was the hardest thing to do." My mother Amara's voice suddenly boomed with strength. "That choice, that's what makes us human. It's not our starships or our weapons or our fancy tech. It's our ability to choose. We can be monsters. We can be destroyers. The galaxy has seen that now. You've all seen what happens when you make us angry." She let the silence hang in the air for a moment. "But we can also be builders. We can be healers. We can be friends. That is the other side of our coin, and that is who we choose to be today." She gestured to the diverse crowd of beings around her. The old Pax Galactica is over. It was a treaty built on fear. Your fear of us, your fear of each other. Fear of what would happen if the fragile peace was ever shattered. That fear kept us isolated just as much as it kept us in line. She reached out her hand and my son James took it, helping her stand a little taller. I'm proposing something new. Not a treaty of fear, but a covenant of equals. Every single species, whether you're big or small, ancient or new, will have a voice. Every species will have a hand in building the future we will all share. She then turned and looked right at the new Zarathian delegation. They were the new leaders who had taken over after the tyrant Velketh was removed from power. Even those who have wronged us will have a seat at the table, because clinging to old hatred just plants the seeds for new pain. Trust me, I know. I could despise your entire species for what your old leader did to me. But what would that accomplish? It would only shrink my own soul, and it would never change the past. The Zarathian diplomats bowed their heads, their faces a mixture of shame and profound gratitude. Amara went on. This new covenant will have clear rules. No species attacks another without just cause. No species will ever enslave or oppress another. We will settle our disagreements with words, and if words fail, we will use fair and impartial arbitration. She gave a faint smile. And if any species breaks these rules, if anyone gets ideas about conquest or destruction, they should know that humanity is still here. We will still be ready. Her smile vanished. We don't want to be the galaxy's police force. We have no desire to be feared. We want to be partners, equals, and friends. But we will never again allow what happened to me to happen to anyone else. That is our solemn promise. That is our covenant. The hall was dead silent for a long, heavy moment. Then, a single pair of hands started clapping, and soon the sound spread like a wildfire. It grew into a thunderous roar of approval from 1,000 different worlds. The Covenant of Equals was signed that very day. Every major power added their signature, and every minor species was personally invited to join. For the first time in the history of the galaxy, there was a real union, a true fellowship of all intelligent life. And so, the years passed. The galaxy began to heal from the deep scars of that short, brutal war. Trade routes buzzed with activity. Knowledge was shared freely between worlds. Problems that had once seemed unsolvable were now being tackled by minds from hundreds of different species working together. General Amara Chen made a full recovery. She went right back to her work as a diplomat, hopping from planet to planet, weaving the new bonds of the covenant even tighter. Her son, James, left the military and became a public administrator, using his incredible mind for organization to build things up instead of tearing them down. But the hidden fleets of humanity were never dismantled. The secret superweapons were never abandoned. Each new generation of humans learned how to maintain them, just as their ancestors had for centuries. Peace was a precious gift, but humanity never forgot how easily it could be taken away. On the 10th anniversary of the Covenant, a celebration was held on the capital world, Concordia Prime. It was a much smaller, more personal gathering than the first one. It was a meeting of delegates who had since become genuine friends, coming together to remember the incredible thing they had built. General Chen, now 73 years old but still sharp as a tack, stood in the memorial garden that had been planted right where she had been shot. The garden was a breathtaking sight, filled with plants from every known world in the galaxy, a living, breathing symbol of unity in diversity. James stood right beside her, his own hair now showing streaks of gray. All around them, beings from dozens of species walked peacefully, their conversations and laughter mixing in the air. A small family hesitantly approached them. They were Zarathian, parents and two little kids, visiting Concordia Prime for the very first time. The youngest, a little girl no older than 5, clutched a single flower in her small blue hands. She nervously walked right up to General Chen. Her parents watched from a few feet back, their faces full of anxiety. Are you the lady from the stories?" the little girl whispered. Amara knelt down, ignoring the loud protest from her old knees. "What stories are those, sweetheart?" "My grandma tells me stories," the girl said. "She says you're the one who taught the whole galaxy how to be kind." Amara looked at the child's sweet, innocent face and felt the sting of tears in her eyes. "I tried," she said softly. "We all tried together." The little girl held out the flower. Held hand. "This is to say thank you." She glanced back at her parents for a little encouragement, and to say sorry for what the bad man did. Amara took the flower with a gentle hand. It was a tiny thing, purple and white, a native bloom from the Zarathian homeworld. It was an apology from a child who was too young to have ever done anything wrong. "Thank you," Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." The child beamed, then scurried back to her parents. They bowed deeply to General Chen before continuing their walk through the garden. James helped his mother get back to her feet. "Do you think it will last?" he asked quietly. "This peace we've built." Amara watched the Zarathian family disappear behind a grove of glowing trees, the little girl holding her mother's hand and pointing excitedly at all the strange new plants. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not. Peace isn't something you build just once and then walk away from. It takes work. Every single day, every single generation, the choice has to be made all over again." She looked up at the distant stars visible through the garden's transparent dome. "But that's the human way, isn't it? We never stop trying. We never stop building. We keep choosing to be better than we have to be." She then looked at her son, the warrior who had held the power of total annihilation in his hands and had chosen mercy instead. "And if it ever breaks again," James finished for her, "we'll be ready." "We always are," Amara smiled, squeezing his hand. "We always are." Around them, the galaxy kept turning, full of beings living their lives, building, creating, arguing, and making up. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't free from conflict, but it was moving forward, together. And in the official archives on every world, in the history lessons taught to every child, humanity's official status had been quietly changed. It no longer read, "primitive species, protected status," as it had for 900 long years. Now it simply said, "Humanity, approach with respect." It was such a small change, but it meant absolutely everything. General Amara Chen gently placed the little purple flower into the soil of the memorial garden, adding one more tiny piece of beauty to a place that had once been scarred by such terrible violence. "Remember what we are," she whispered, her own words from a decade ago echoing back to her. And now, at long last, the entire galaxy finally understood what she meant. They were human, capable of both unimaginable destruction and boundless compassion. They were fierce warriors and gentle healers, builders of empires and guardians of the peace. They were a paradox, and they chose every single day which side of themselves to show the universe. That was their gift. That was their true legacy. The covenant would last, not because it was backed by weapons or fear, but because it was renewed by choice, by the daily decision of trillions of beings to be better, to work together, and to remember the hard lessons of the past. And if the day ever came when that choice was threatened, when darkness tried to rise again, humanity would be there, watching, waiting, and ready, but always, always hoping that their strength would never be needed again. And that, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.